August 14th, 1981 was a rainy day in East Molen, Illinois. A mother arrives home where her 19-year-old daughter and 1.5-year-old grandson are staying with her. She expects the home to be empty as her daughter was supposed to be at work and her grandson at the babysitter's. You can imagine her surprise when she saw her daughter's car still parked in the driveway. The confusion was compounded when she found herself unable to get into her house because it was locked from the inside. That confusion turned to fear when she heard her grandson crying and her daughter wasn't answering the door. When she finally forced her way into the home, she found her grandson unharmed but alone, and no trace of her daughter anywhere. Over 40 years have passed with no signs of Regina McCorkle, but it's important that we not forget her story, or stop looking for answers. I'm Megan, and each week I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week I'm bringing you the unsolved disappearance of Regina McCorkle. Regina McCorkle was born on October 16, 1961, to Father Robert and Mother Emma Jean. Regina was one of 4 and had 2 sisters and a brother. Regina was known as quiet and sweet. She loved to play tennis, go to the movies, and hang out with her friends. Her family was involved in their local church pretty heavily, and she was a good student at United Township High School in East Molen. East Molen is part of an area within the Mississippi River Valley called the Quad Cities. Formerly 4 cities and now 5, they sit in southeastern Iowa and northwestern Illinois. Besides East Molen, there's the Iowa cities of Davenport and Bettendorf, and in Illinois, the cities of Rock Island and Molen. Located on the bend of the Mississippi where, quote, the river runs east and west, the Quad Cities is made up of several close-knit municipalities. It is easily accessible by rail, barge, and air, and sits on the convergence of Interstates 74, 80, and 88. So this is a very interconnected area. East Molen itself is a small city with a population of about 21,000. For work in the area, it's long been known for its combine production facilities. Yes, I'm talking about the farm equipment. Many people in the area today are employed by the John Deere Harvester Works factory, which is the largest manufacturer of combines for John Deere. Regina's father worked there at one point in his career, and then there was also an international harvesters plant where Regina's mother worked back then. The area is known to be pretty safe. I'm not going to say it's one of those towns where you hear people say, crime just never happened here. But the story I'm going to tell you about certainly made the news in the early 80s, and this was not common. It really puzzled people and drew concern in the community. So Regina, as I mentioned, attended United Township High School, and she actually got married really young as a teenager to a man named Curtis and gave birth to their baby boy. Curtis was a year older than her, so they were super young, and their marriage didn't work out. So Regina moved back in with her mother, and not too long after, she began dating another man named James, who was the same age as her. Her mother, Emma, lived in the Watertown neighborhood of East Molen at 1507 11th Avenue. As it stands today, it's a quaint little bungalow on a neighborhood street. Emma sometimes goes by her middle name, Jean, and she's referred to as both depending on the media outlets, but to make it less confusing, I'm going to just call her Emma. On the morning of August 14th, 1981, Emma got ready for work at International Harvesters and asked Regina about her upcoming day. According to Emma, she said Regina told her she was going to take a friend to look for a job and put in applications. Other sources say that this was actually her boyfriend James she was going to be taking for work. So she would then bring her son CJ to the babysitters and head to work for the evening. Regina worked as a custodian at a place called Rock Island Arsenal, and she was a valued employee with excellent attendance and communication. Emma said goodbye to Regina, who was still in her blue nightshirt at the time, and headed off to work. But she later told a reporter for the Quad City News that she had a bad feeling in the pit of her stomach all day, and she wasn't even sure why. And how many times on this podcast, not just on this podcast, but listening to cases in general, have you heard something like this? People call it gut instinct or a mother's instinct or intuition or the Holy Spirit. And it seems that time and again, sometimes people just have this sense that something is off. So just before 4 p.m., Emma arrives home and is surprised to still see Regina's car parked in the garage. It was Regina's dream car, a 1979 Mustang that she had saved up money to buy. And that dream car was supposed to have taken CJ to daycare and Regina to work. Puzzled, Emma made her way up to the door only to find it locked from the inside. Now, I was a little confused about this at first, but it was clarified that while Emma, of course, had keys to her own home, the house had 2 doors that were screen doors that only locked from the inside, and they didn't have any keys. With that first front screen door uncharacteristically locked, she made her way to the back where she found that one locked too. At this point, I imagine Emma is just having difficulty piecing together why all these circumstances are happening. And then, as she makes her way back to the front, she is shook out of her confusion by the sound of her grandson crying. She could hear him inside, and she started banging on the door for Regina to open up. But as you can probably imagine, she didn't. In an effort to get her grandson, Emma ripped the screen off the front door and unlocked it herself to get in. When she made her way down to Regina's bedroom, she found CJ unharmed in the bedroom. He was fine, as I said, but the room door was closed. Some sources even say that he was locked in there, but it sounds more like Emma was able to just open the door, so my assumption would be that it was more just closed. Most 18-month-olds aren't super able to reach doorknobs well or understand or have the motor capacity to open them consistently. CJ was very little, so he was not able to relay much information. He just kept repeating the words, "Mommy, door, mommy, door." Emma knew something was up, so she phoned police immediately. But you know what I'm going to say next. They told her she had to wait 48 hours. Emma was absolutely not about to wait 48 hours to do nothing, so she started collecting information from what she could see around her. She confirmed that Regina did not show up to work or call in sick in advance, and that was never a history in her employment. She always had shown up. She had never no call, no showed. She noticed that the house was very put together, just as she had left it. There were no signs of a struggle or a confrontation. And Regina's belongings were left behind. Her beloved Mustang, as I mentioned, her purse was left behind. It had money in it, and she had money elsewhere that was just left behind. She had brand new outfits that she just bought that had tags on them still. And of course, let's not forget her baby. Emma could not sleep that night, and dissatisfied with the response of local police refusing to take her case, she called the FBI the next morning. In an interview with Quad City Local 4 crime reporter Linda Cook, who I have to thank for her reporting on this case, the link to the original reporting is in the show notes, Emma shared this about that phone call to the FBI.
They asked me if she was white or black. I'm like, what difference does it make? I said, that's my baby.
If you're enjoying this episode, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. I also have an Instagram page at Simpler Time Crime Pod, where I share photos and maps and all sorts of information that can provide a visual for the case. I also have a TikTok channel and Facebook page. Word of mouth helps me tremendously and allows these older cold cases reach more people. Thank you so much for your support. The FBI didn't immediately get involved, but police did finally take her police report. They noted the same things that Emma did. The locked doors from the inside, the baby being left behind, the belongings being left behind, and not reporting to work. The first question they had was, if both doors to the home were locked from the inside, how did she get out? The answer was, the only way possible would be through a basement window. When they went down there was a screen that was ripped out. However, they couldn't tell if the screen had been removed from the inside or the outside of the house. And to be honest, I'm not sure how you tell this, but I know it has come up in other cases. I think of something like the high-profile case of Darlie Routier, where the cut screen was a huge piece of information for the prosecution because they were able to determine the screen had been cut from the inside of the house. However, maybe that's the difference. If a screen is cut versus just removed, I'm sure there's more evidence when you're actually distorting and cutting the actual screen versus just removing it. There's also another case I remember that they were able to determine something about the movement of the screen and what direction based on the dust on the windowsill and if it was disturbed, but I didn't hear anything about that with this case. The screen was found on the basement floor, so it either could have been pushed in or removed and left there. Nothing else was out of place. Like Emma noted, there was not any sign of a struggle in the house. Regina typically was a person who made her bed, and her bed was unmade. She normally would wear house slippers around the house, and then when she would get ready to leave for the day, she would put on her shoes, which she kept by the back door in the kitchen. She would then take her slippers and leave them there by that door so that when she got home, she could slip back into them to wear around the house. Her house slippers were still next to her bed like they would be if she took them off to sleep at night. And her shoes that she wore out of the house were still by that kitchen door. So that would imply that she left the house barefoot if she did. The only thing missing was the article of clothing Regina was last seen in, her blue nightgown. In an interview decades later, Regina's mother Emma also said that the top sheet to her bed was missing, but that one interview is the only time I've ever seen that mentioned. So I'm not exactly sure what or why that is, but I just wanted to put that out there. It is also located on her NamUs page, and it says that possibly a top bedsheet was missing on that webpage. Of course, investigators wanted to do two things first: canvass the neighborhood to see if there were any witnesses, or talk to anybody who was in a romantic relationship with her in her life now or previously. So let's start with the neighborhood. Emma said her neighborhood was filled with active retirees who were outside all the time in the summer, and they were not away from the home during the day. So other neighborhoods that have a more working class, where it's younger families, they're, going to be out during the middle of a day like this, but not them. So on this day, though, it was super rainy, so nobody was outside. Even though many people may have been inside their homes and possibly even looking out the window, nobody reported seeing anything unusual in the neighborhood that morning. And that's really interesting to me because there's nobody who knows the neighborhood happenings like the old retirees. They know everybody's business. Emma did share with police that as she was looking for witnesses before they officially took a report, a Hispanic man in the neighborhood came up to her and said that he had seen an attractive black woman getting into a black car with two men and that this woman looked like she was crying. Emma said she didn't know this man or where he lived in the neighborhood and that he spoke limited English, so they were having a difficult time understanding each other. Emma reported this to the police, but they were unable to track this witness down. So now over to her romantic interests. Police were actually familiar with both because, as it turns out, officers had been called to the McCorkle residence on more than one occasion for each man relating to domestic disturbances involving them and Regina. You'll recall that there is 19-year-old James, her current boyfriend, and 20-year-old Curtis, her ex-husband. Both were able to provide very important information. James was interviewed extensively, and he said that he spoke to Regina on the phone that morning. She seemed happy and had told him that she was going to be picking him up to take him to look for jobs. So that's where I know her mom says a friend, but I really think it was James based on this statement. He was also specific and said they were planning to go to the Quad Cities nuclear power plant where he was hoping to apply for a job there. He didn't have a car at the time, which is why Regina was going to drive him. They got off the phone at approximately 9:30 a.m., but Regina never did come pick him up. Investigators asked if he would take a polygraph test, and he agreed, and those investigators released to the media that he passed completely with zero deception. They described it as passing with flying colors, and so they cleared him. Curtis provided a statement to police that he was there at the McCorkle residence at 10 a.m. that morning and that he knocked on the door repeatedly, but nobody answered it. When nobody answered after a few minutes, he said that he left. That, of course, raises alarm bells for me. What are you doing there? Why did you show up at 10? Did you hear your son on the other side of the door? So many questions. Questions we don't know the answer to because, on the advice of his attorney, he stopped cooperating and refused a polygraph examination. Now look, that does look bad, but it really is a catch-22 for someone who is a suspect, even if they're innocent. You'll never find an attorney who will tell you to take a polygraph examination, and oftentimes you'll be advised by an attorney not to answer any questions either. And so that is a fair stance to take, but it certainly doesn't do you any favors in the court of public opinion. And it certainly had the same impact for police. But without anything to prove Curtis had anything to do with it, they had to put a pin in that for now and look in another direction. Locally, Regina's neighborhood and church community rallied together. One concerned neighborhood citizen didn't have a lot of money but wanted to show care and concern, so they offered up a $100 reward for any information. This show of community sparked more of it, and another private citizen put up a $1,500 reward. Then, the church pulled together to raise money for the reward as well. On August 31st, they held a candlelight vigil at the Community Church of God in Christ. With Regina's face out to the local news stations, police began getting a fair amount of tips, and the lead investigator who tracked them all down was a man named Detective Ernie Manrique. He has said over the years that he has lost sleep laying in bed trying to figure out what happened to Regina, and that it's one of the most bizarre and perplexing cases he's ever investigated. First, there was a couple of tips that said Regina had been abducted and brought across state lines to Davenport, Iowa. This was an anonymous phone tip and specified that she was being held against her will at an abandoned home there. Because this crossed state lines, this officially brought the FBI into the mix. They weren't regularly working the case, but anytime East Moline detectives had to cross into Iowa, the FBI agent would go too. So they went to the supposed location because it was pretty specific, and it turned up nothing. They said that they went to multiple 5+ abandoned houses that fit the description of the neighborhood and the block that it was supposedly in, but there was no indication that Regina was there or had ever been there. Then there was a local drifter who said he saw a woman who matched Regina's description boarding a bus towards Iowa City. One problem with that, though, is that he witnessed this woman having a small child with her, and as we know, Regina's young son was left behind. Then, a woman who grew up with Regina and knew her personally said she saw Regina working at a nearby hospital. But this didn't pan out either, and this witness got kind of weird once police came to interview her. She refused to talk to them. Police brought in a psychic who worked the case for a week and shared that she had a vision that Regina was being held in a motel in Molen. Police looked into this hotel and did find a woman who bore a strong resemblance to Regina, but it wasn't her. But this psychic abruptly stopped working with police, and she said it was because she was afraid for her life. And she wasn't the only one. In an interview with the Quad City Times, Detective Manrique shared that everyone seems scared, even Regina's closest friends. He said, quote, "Everybody I've talked to is afraid. I don't know why," end quote. At the 6-month mark, all of the leads stopped coming in and the case began to fizzle out. Detective Manrique said all they could really do is sit and wait. The next lead wouldn't come in until spring of 1983, when a man reported to police that he saw Regina at a small-town tavern with 2 people in nearby Iowa. He claims he knows it was her because he knew her prior to her disappearance. Just like all of the others, though, they chased this down to no avail. In 1992, Regina's father passed away. She was still listed as a surviving child of his in his obituary. Over the years, the tone shifted. Regina's case dropped off the media radar, and most of the investigation would be comparing any Jane Does found to Regina. Emma recalled multiple times over the years that police would come to her and say a body had been found, but it never would end up being Regina. Regina's son is now in his 40s, and he maintained a close relationship with his grandmother Emma throughout the years. He was raised by his father, Regina's ex-husband Curtis, and his family. His grandmother stated that he had a successful military career and is doing well for himself, but that not knowing what happened to his mother and not having his mother present in his life still haunts him. He gets sad each year on things like her birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance. In the same Channel 4 interview from a couple of years ago, Emma said that recent to that time, Regina's ex-husband Curtis had called her one night, and she flat out asked him, "Did you kill my daughter, and what did you do to her?" And he was adamant that he would never hurt Regina, that he didn't hurt Regina, and that he loved her very, very much. As the investigation stands today, there have been no new leads in years. So I want to take a moment to discuss a few thoughts I had and questions I have, and maybe you have some too. Please share your thoughts by commenting on the episode in the podcasting platform you are listening on, or just go over to our Instagram page. So first, so many of my thoughts come down to this basement window. The screen is removed. If this is the only way out, why? Why are you choosing to go in and out of this basement window if you are abducting her? It's possible that Regina knew the person and let them into her home, and then this is just the exit through the basement window, but this is infinitely more suspicious looking than just going out the front door, and more risky if you're the abductor. In either scenario, you have to maintain control of Regina if you're abducting her. If you let her go out of the basement window, there's a chance she could take off running if she goes first. If you go first, then she has no reason to follow you out. There is one very, very early article where the detective working the case describes the doors as just being closed, like pulled behind them and locked, which if that were the case, the basement could have just been the point of entry, and then the perpetrator locked the door behind them. But Emma has been adamant over the years that no, it was these screen doors that you could only lock from the inside. Whatever the case may be, I believe that the window holds the keys to this case, and if we knew the scenario around that window, we could know a lot more about what happened. Police did say that they tried to find fingerprints, but the window down there was too smudged to get any usable fingerprints. My other major thought goes back to her ex-husband, Curtis. I want to know why he was there at her house that day. I'm sure police asked, but they never released that information. If Curtis is telling the truth, then that would mean her abduction took place between 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m., the time between when she got off the phone with her boyfriend James and when Curtis reports that he showed up and nobody answered the door. He is obviously someone who holds a lot of suspicion in this case, but just a few counterpoints to consider. He did end up raising their son, and I'm not aware that there was any big custody issues happening at the time of the disappearance or anything like that at play. And think about it. He was a 20-year-old guy at the time, and no offense, men, but men at 20 years old are not the most mature, ready-to-be dads in most cases. So by harming Regina, he really committed himself to signing up for being a 20-year-old single father of a 1-year-old, which is a lot. I rarely offer a theory, but the one that sticks close to me, given all the evidence, is that she let somebody into her house who she knew. The conversation maybe took place in the bedroom, given that her slippers were next to her bed, and she was said to always wear them around the house, like I said. So perhaps a crime took place there, and the person wrapped her body in the top sheet and then took her out the basement window. I wonder if the basement window faced the back of the house or the front, because that would be a factor in terms of risk of being seen. If it was in the back of the house, I could see that being a much less riskier scenario than trying to carry a body out the front door or something like that. Regina's mother felt it was somebody she knew who knew the routine of their schedules. Here's another clip from the 2022 interview with Channel 4 of the Quad Cities.
Whoever had been in the house, I think they knew my pattern. They knew when I would get home, because the baby didn't look like he was in any distress or anything. There ain't no way that she would leave her baby in this house alone.
And so if you look at that in a very misguided way, it shows that whoever did this had at least some care or concern for the baby, because they knew that Regina's mother would be home to care for the baby that night. I want to wrap things up with a final statement about this case. In so many instances, families of missing people have to find some sense of closure for themselves to be able to regain a shred of normalcy in their lives. And we regularly hear about people holding a memorial service, declaring their loved one dead, and having a gravestone, albeit an empty grave. But Emma could just never bring herself to do so.
I've not declared her dead in my heart, and I can't bring myself to put a headstone any place. She's alive and show up before I pass. I'm hoping that somebody knows something. But I would never declare Gina dead.
Sadly, Emma would never see the day she hoped for. Just this year, in May of 2024, Emma Jean McCorkle passed away at the age of 82 without the answers that she so longed for in her life here on Earth. At the time of her disappearance, Regina was described as 5'7" and 130 to 137 pounds. She is a Black woman who was 19 years old at the time of her disappearance, with dark hair and brown eyes. Her ears were pierced, she sometimes went by Gina, and she was wearing a light blue nightgown at the time of her disappearance. She would be in her early 60s if she were still alive today. Regina is listed in NamUs, and her DNA is available for comparison should a Jane Doe be found that matches her profile. If you have any information on the disappearance of Regina McCorkle, please contact the East Molen Police Department at 309-752-1547. This has been A Simpler Time True Crime. Please join me again next week as I dive into another cold case. If you've just found my podcast, you can catch up on the first 25 episodes I've released while you wait for my next one. Thank you so much for listening.